Hello, I'm Logan Loya,
And I'm Zachary Finlayson.
and you're listening to Terror
Terror
Talk.
Talk.
Today we're just going to be talking about things that we'd like to see in horror movies, either like more or less of. So,
Okay.
what things do you like to see in horror movies?
I really like to see horror movies that break tropes. I like to see horror movies that are like really indie. They create new ideas. Like I think that's why I like Killer Clowns from Outer Space so much is because it's just not something you normally see, and it's something that's really hard to make in today's space where Hollywood's so overtaken by the same people making the same movies. I like seeing new things come up like that.
Yeah, like an overused trope like recently is like where these group of people like start a curse or whatever, and then like they start dying, and then they find somebody who has survived the first round, and then the person who survives dies and they somehow triumph it was even in Night Swim, which is a movie about a killer pool.
It's happened so many times. It's crazy. It's like, isn't that like almost the exact plot of Tarot?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the exact plot of Tarot.
Yeah.
It's the exact plot of Tarot, Night Swim, It Follows, Truth or Dare.
Anybody listening to this at home, don't watch Tarot. It's not good.
It's not good. I mean, the monsters, they look really good. The CGI is pretty good at some points, but the story and the characters are just really stupid.
And it's like sometimes we can get away with having a mediocre story and good CGI, but like horror is one of those franchises where it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, you really need a good story in horror to keep people invested and for it to actually be a good movie.
Absolutely. Like just going back to indie horror movies, one of my favorite movies is The House That Jack Built. It's just such a good indie horror movie, and I think when you take it out of that scope of like Hollywood producers and all the expectations and how much they expect to get in a box office return, you have a lot more freedom because there's a reason there's so many tropes. It's because it works. You get money and
Mm.
it just like people watch it. It might not be their favorite, but people do watch it, and it's way less risky than trying new things. Because there are some horror movies that have tried new things and it's just kind of terrible. It's like not good at all.
Yeah, and like another trope that I've been kind of been seeing that started with Terrifier is just a brutal silent killer, and like it started with slashers, but Terrifier really brought it up to a new level where it's like so much more gory and brutal, and I've been seeing a lot of things trying to be that. And like they tried it with, I haven't seen it yet, but a new one that just came out called Hard Eyes. And then you have the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey tried to be that. And it's a new trope that I feel is going to be overused a lot, but something that I want to see more in horror movies are more practical effects,
Absolutely.
because practical effects brings the movie to life, especially in horror movies. Like if you're an actor, I wouldn't be scared of a tennis ball on a giant pole. I'd be scared of like an actual like puppet or something they made to look like the monster you're trying to be scared of.
Well, because CGI is so cheap now. It's like it's such a developed way of putting in what you want to be there without actually having to be there.
Mm.
And that makes it so cheap because you don't have to have the practical effects dummies and all the fake blood and all the pyrotechnics or whatever.
Yeah, but it it makes it look better. It makes the movie feel more real. And like especially with CGI blood, CGI cannot do liquid well,
Yeah.
especially with blood, because like there's some horrible CGI blood the in Sweeney Todd. Like it's the beginning like title scene, and like they completely made it CGI and it has terrible blood, and like it's just the intro, so it can kind of get away with it, but other movies use that like same look for
Yeah.
the actual blood, and it looks horrible.
I remember me and you've recorded some movies and we tried to do CGI blood. It didn't turn out well.
It did not go.
Granted, we're pretty bad at doing CGI, but like,
I think we need a better software for CGI.
yeah. That gets me to another thing. It's becoming so available. CGI is like with tools like Blender, you can create fake blood, albeit it looks pretty bad, but you can create it at, I think it's like a zero budget now. Like you really like all you need is time because Blender's free, and you can learn everything you need to online to do that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that's made it so much more available to people in a way that fake blood just isn't. Like, it's really hard to buy buckets and buckets and buckets of fake blood. Is just a person that's just working a 9 to 5 normal, likes to do some recording on the side for indie projects and that kind of stuff.
And like some fake blood, or like if you use CGI blood, that causes like after you use the CGI blood, like it looks weird because the blood isn't on the floor anymore, or like it causes imperfections and like continuity errors.
Absolutely, because it's like with CGI blood, it all works off of trying to model particles to like look like it's a fluid, but what it has to do is like since the fluids are so like small, that's the idea of like just little molecules that are connected loosely flowing. Obviously, a computer can't model every single molecule, so it has to do a lot of guesswork, and your eyes can see that. Like it makes a bunch of little particles that are still really small, but not obviously the size of particles, and then it'll just mix them all together and then create meshes between the particles. So it looks really bad from like a human perspective. Like it's getting better, and eventually we probably will be able to model like small enough that the human eye can't detect it. But right now we just can't.
Yeah, and like, see, in my opinion, some CGI it needs to be good. It needs to be good CGI to bring it to life. But I remember in Halloween H2O, just in a random shot, they had a CGI Michael Myers mask on the actor. I don't know if he forgot to put the mask on, and they were just like, let's not reshoot it, just CGI it on there.
I'll fix it in post.
But it looked so bad.
It's just stuff like that that's just, with indie movies, they're on such low budgets that I think they have to get creative, and I think that's what I like about indie horror movies so much. Indie movies in general, but indie horror movies especially, because you have to get very creative with just your story in general. Because when you're writing, you have to think, can I actually do this? Like, the house that Jack built really has nothing in way of... Oh, actually, no, the last scene with all the, like, where it descends into hell, that has some special effects in it.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't think you can...
I don't think he actually went to Tartarus, but...
Just like, we'll film on site. We'll go to hell for this movie.
But the majority of it was very limited in what it could do. There's not a lot of special effects, and what it does do, it does well, and it makes it feel like that's just another part. And honestly, the parts in hell were some of the weakest parts because they were CGI.
Yeah.
And the parts, because he's just a murderer. He's a normal guy that's a murderer, and it's just going through his life, and the scariness comes from seeing his mind break, not from seeing, spooky monster behind the bed.
Yeah.
Or like something like that.
And then, like, I feel I tend to go for more of the classic horror movies because it's all practical effects and not like the first Terminator. There is a wild scene where like a truck explodes, and they lined up shots well, and they built such a good model for the truck exploding that you can't really tell that it's a miniature model. It looks like an actual like fully sized truck blowing up, but it's just a miniature.
Wow, that's incredible. It's honestly crazy how creative they had to be with everything that they did back then.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have any CGI. It's not like nowadays where it's like, oh, we probably shouldn't. They just didn't have a choice in the matter. It's the tools that were given to them.
Yeah.
And some of the techniques they used was just so interesting. Like how in, I think, it might have been The Invisible Man.
Oh.
Or
Yeah.
like a lot of those older movies, you had to go frame by frame if you wanted to actually edit it.
Yeah.
You had to go literally paint onto the frames. You had to paint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild with the Invisible Man, the 1931 Invisible Man, because imagine, I mean, like, the effects don't look as good today, but I mean that's obvious because it's in the 1930s. But for back then, those are some great effects. Like, at some shots, it genuinely looks like he's invisible, and it's so good. And like, I can't remember exactly how they did it, but they filmed like on with wires, everything like moving, and then they painted the actor in this specific black color, and then they painted, and then they put him, or I think they put him over that shot, and then had an entire like black background, and they put that shot also over it, and I'm
Huh.
not sure how exactly they did it.
Interesting. That's one to research later.
Yeah, but the finished effect looks really good for the 1930s.
But then, like, earlier than that, the effects were like, they were practical in a way that was kind of silly. Like, they still tried to edit it in post, but what their post looked like is literally taking the frames, taking each slide of the frame and painting the image onto it. Like, that's how you got a lot of the backgrounds. Or you cropped people out of things. You literally had to crop them out. Like, you had to cut them out with shears.
That's wild. And I feel like what would make a good horror movie today would be just because, especially like nowadays, I feel like they can make better practical effects than they could back then, but they don't want to spend the money or the time doing it, so they just slap some CGI on it.
Absolutely. And that works for some franchises. Like, I think action is one of the ones where you can get away with it because it's like, people like to see cool explosions. It's kind of hard to see cool explosions.
Yeah, and the Marvel films, like 90% of it's
Those entire
CGI.
movies are CGI. Like, it's all done in post. It's actually kind of crazy how much CGI there is in Marvel.
Yeah, it's just like almost every behind the scenes like clips or photos you see, they're just on a giant blue or green screen.
I can't blame them. I mean, it works, and the Marvel movies are actually pretty good most of the time.
Yeah, a lot of the new recent ones, some of the CGI hasn't been great, and then the stories haven't been all too interesting.
Yeah, I was really disappointed with Multiverse of Madness, if I'm being honest. I
Really?
still liked it. It was still good, but it was like,
Some of the CGI in that movie didn't look too great.
and the story was definitely lagging.
Yeah, I liked Multiverse of Madness mainly because Sam Raimi directed it, and he did the Evil Dead series, and he did the original like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies.
I think I'm just tired of the whole multiverse trope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, we need to come up with a new way. I know you want to tell your stories and you want to have them like all be coexistent. Sometimes you just have to say, hey, these aren't linked in any way, and I just wanted to tell it again.
Yeah. I know they did that with an animated Spider-Man show recently. I think it just came out. But I'm excited. I want them, like Marvel, you know, you have all the heroes and villain stuff. I want them to go more towards the horror side of Marvel because it's really interesting. Like they did a short or a Halloween special called Werewolf by Night, and it had like all the horror movie elements. I mean, they made the werewolf look like the original like Wolfman style from the I can't remember what year, but it was in the 1940s, I think. And they like the movie was completely black and white, which I really liked. Because I feel like there's a lot of things you can do in Marvel with horror.
Going back to horror movies,
Mm.
I honestly, something I've seen that's been fading out of horror for a while is slashers. Like, I feel like they're way less abundant nowadays than they were, like, when horror movies were first created. Like, you look back, or maybe they're just worse, and that's why we don't remember them.
I think that's a good idea though. Slashers have had their time. I mean they're the biggest horror genre. Like whenever you think of horror, the core 3 slashers come to your mind, which is Freddy, Jason and Michael. And I love slashers to death, but they've done it so many times that they need to move on to something else.
I guess I can, yeah, that makes sense. For me, I like psychological horror. I just don't like always having psychological horror all the time.
Yeah.
Because that's what it kind of has turned into. Like,
Somewhat. I mean, like, I know, like, Terrifier is probably the new, like, biggest slasher that's going. And then, like, we had Wolfman that came out not too long ago. And that was a remake of the original. And it was more unsettling. And, like, it was more claustrophobic, which I really like to see in horror movies. And like some more genres that I'd like to see are, I know paranormal had their big thing, but I feel like they could do it in a different way that's new.
They just overdid it somewhat.
Yeah.
I feel like on the same note,
Same with like religious horror, like The Nun, or like literally 2 movies, The First Omen and Immaculate, I think. They were basically the same exact movie, just a little bit different. It's like copy off my homework but change it a little bit so nobody notices.
well, it's like, honestly, we went through a while there where horror movies were actually terrible. Like, we're getting some good ones now, but like I think it was like 2017.
Oh yeah.
A little bit after that, like especially during COVID time. Oh man, were they bad? We got some real stinkers around there.
I think the greatest horror movie that came out of 2017 was the It remake. And I didn't care for it too much.
It wasn't that good. I mean, it wasn't terrible. I don't know why it got so popular. It was okay.
Yeah. And then like a really good movie that has come out in recent years was Smile. Smile was really good. And like I mean, they kind of did the same trope where like somebody who left the like loop came back to like explain to the new person in the loop, but they did it well. And like a lot of the scares in that movie were really interesting and well shot. The CGI in that movie though, not great.
One movie I did like that did come out around that period is The Empty Man. I
Yeah.
really liked The Empty Man.
The Empty Man was really good. I liked how confusing it was.
Yeah, it definitely like it makes you think a lot, and it doesn't disrespect the viewer's intelligence like a lot of movies do, because like a lot of movies assume that you're really stupid and you just don't understand English. So like they're like, oh, we have to, what's a movie that does that?
There's so many. I think Tarot a little bit does that.
Let's take it to its extreme. Moonfall. Moonfall assumes that the viewer has like the IQ of a goldfish. Like everything is spelled out. It's never show, don't tell. It's always explain it and show it and then re-explain it.
Yeah, and that movie was terrible.
But The Empty Man really doesn't do that. It's kind of just, it shows you what's happening. It respects your intelligence enough that you can come to your own conclusions, and it's not going to hold your hand through it.
I like The Lighthouse, which doesn't really explain anything, and like the story could be you're in the perspective of one man, but that man's psyche isn't all there. So like you don't know if you can trust the story, or like you can't trust his perspective. So you don't know if what he's seeing is actually what's going on.
That's interesting. I like movies that do that. I like movies specifically that have a change up. I like movies with a twist, but not with a twist that's just like infuriating.
Yeah.
A lot of movies do that thing where, oh, it was all a dream.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Come on. Like that's the most like enraging ending in my opinion, because it's like it can be done well, but it almost never is.
Mm.
And then it leaves you like, okay, so what was real? What was actually going on?
Yeah, it's kind of like the American Psycho, where like towards the end of it, it's all like his drawings and things. So it's kind of like there was one person he killed named Paul, and like towards the end, he's just like he was talking to a man and like getting angry because he thinks that he killed Paul, but Paul was actually off on a vacation trip. And there's one detective looking into the disappearance of Paul, so you're not quite sure if those interviews with the detective are real or if it's just his mind made them up to make him more paranoid.
No, you see, the thing is, I do like that ending. So I don't know what it is that makes some of the ones that like are happening in more modern times bad. Because it's like that ending is actually interesting. It leaves me questioning in a way that doesn't feel defeating or disrespectful to the rest of the story. I think that's the biggest thing.
And like throughout the story, you can definitely see things that aren't really possible. Like there's one scene where he's at the top of the stairs and he drops a chainsaw and it somehow hits the person he's aiming for, or towards the end of the movie when it gets more wild and crazy, when he shoots at a police car and somehow the police car blows up and all he has is like a small pistol. So like you can start to see how things don't really make sense on how he could do this type of things.
I think the biggest thing is whether the director, or I guess writer, was thinking that from the beginning and gonna have it be, oh, you're gonna find out at the end that he's insane, or if they got to the end and they didn't know how to actually end it and they're like, oh, it never happened actually. That's how it's gonna end. Ending is it didn't happen.
I want to read the book since it's based off a book, and I want to see how similar it is. And like another scene in that movie was he's dragging a bloody body bag past a police guard, and the guard's just like, okay. Like nothing happened. He's just like, okay.
And honestly, American Psycho is such a great movie.
It really is.
It breaks almost all of the rules, but it does it in a way that's just so good. The story doesn't really make that much sense, in my opinion. It's really convoluted and loopy, and there's a lot of, what would you call it, like subtext. There's a lot of ideas that aren't directly addressed, and then it's like, oh, that just happens.
Another thing I don't like seeing in horror movies is trying to make it funny. like Tarot. Tarot is like the most recent one I can think of that tried to make like a haha funny horror movie, and it was horrible. But then you have like
Was Tarot supposed to be a comedy?
Yeah.
You know what? It worked because that stuff was terrible and it was funny to laugh at. It was the funniest clown to throw tomatoes at.
And like Terrifier does funny well because like Art's just a silly little clown guy who's brutally murdering people. And another movie that did it well was that, in my opinion, is Ready or Not, which is a movie where this woman marries into a family, and their ancestor used to make board games, and like there was like a family tradition that you'd have to play a game each night, but like if you get hide and seek, it's the worst one because the family has to find the new like the either the husband or the wife marrying into the family, they have to find them and kill them, or else the entire family dies.
Huh.
And there's a lot of dark humor in it, and it does it so well that it's really funny at some points.
Okay, while we're on the topic of horror movies and comedy, we have to talk about Scary Movie.
Oh, I don't like it. I I mean, I don't like it because like it makes fun of horror. I'd like to see a movie like that, but I think it's too dumb.
You know what? I love it. I love scary movies, all of them, because the joke is that they're so bad that they're funny. They're so stupid and nonsensical that they're funny. The jokes are bad, but that's why I like it.
In my opinion, they're so stupid that they are stupid.
It's like it's the same reason why I love Moonfall so much, is because it's such a terrible movie. Or any of the Neil Breen movies. Any listeners at home, if you haven't watched Neil Breen, you need to watch Neil Breen. It's absolutely one of the greatest directors of our generation.
They're Neil Breen's movies are interesting.
They're great. My favorite thing is how all of it's just nonsensical. Like it's like it's like we were talking about earlier, where the director planned to have it be it's all a dream, except it never was a dream and it actually did just happen. It never was supposed to make sense, and it never did make sense.
Yeah. Another thing I like about horror is like really low budget horror movies that do well. There's one called Benny Loves You, which was mostly created by one man. It was scored, edited, directed, written, and like all the actors were close friends and family. But I like the story, and I think it's kind of funny. And there was one part where like they get blood on the walls and stuff, and they were filming in a friend's house, so there was so much tarp everywhere, and it was so funny. Because that movie had little to no budget.
Because horror and comedy can work so well together. Because, like, well, in the brain, they're really close. Because the whole point of comedy is it's an expectation that wasn't met. And horror is all about building up expectations. Mm-hmm. So it can work really well. It's just, I honestly think Hollywood writers can't write jokes. Like, their jokes are just really bad. The only time they're funny is when they don't mean to be.
Yeah. And, like DC just came out with Creature Commandos, which is all about like the monsters and more of the horror elements of DC, and they actually did the jokes pretty funny in that show. Like DC humor is pretty bad, but in that show it was genuinely funny.
That's just like, I guess, like getting down to the brass tacks, what I want to see in a horror movie. I want it to be new. I want it to be creative with what it does. I want it to be it doesn't have to be indie, but I want it to feel indie. I want it to feel like it has soul and people actually care about the movie. It's not just something they have to get out. It's something they want to get out. And I don't know, simpler things. I guess I just want more practical effects.
Yeah. My horror movies I generally go to, and some horror movies that I'd like more to see are just new concepts. Or if you could do old concepts but put a new twist on it and do it well. And then I'd love to see more practical effects, because it just gives the movie more soul than just computer generated
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, what we need to do is we need to stop doing camera work like we're filming an action movie. The camera work in horror movies is actually so bad. That's why The House that Jack Built is great. It's because it doesn't follow the same ideas that the rest of movies do. Because horror works so good with perspective. Like, having a change in perspective changes everything about a horror movie. So just like, the house that Jack built. I guess it's if you, I'm gonna keep going back to that. It feels grainy at some parts, and it feels disorientating at some parts, and it's just it all flows so well to make you confused and unsettled, and it's not like Tarot or Ouija or any one of those terrible blockbuster horror movies that's just like filming it like you would be filming an action movie.
Yeah.
The camera shouldn't work in the same way because it has a different purpose.
I like horror movies with uncomfortable shots.
Yeah, I like because it's just like they're supposed to feel unsettling. It builds up those expectations that you can break, or you fulfill the expectations, and that's horror.
Yeah. Well, I think that'll do it for this episode. So, I've been Logan Loya.
I've been Zachary Finlayson.
And you've been listening to
Terror Talk.